October the 31st, 1994, Halloween night, 3:58 p.m. American Eagle Flight 4184, departing from Indianapolis, was scheduled for a routine 1 hour and 20-minute domestic flight. 68 innocent people boarded the plane to fly to Chicago. None of them knew they would never see their families again. This is the story of one of the most horrific icing accidents in aviation history. A story that would change the entire aviation industry and determine the fate of a TR aircraft. Hello, dear viewers. On this channel, we cover the most dramatic and educational accidents in aviation history. If you also enjoy these mysterious and terrifying stories, please don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on your notifications. Pre-flight, an ordinary day. On the morning of October the 31st, 1994, everything was normal at Indianapolis Airport. American Eagle Flight 4184 was a routine regional route operated by Simmons Airlines. The TR-72-200 turboprop aircraft was set to depart for Chicago O'Hare Airport with 64 passengers and 4 crew members on board. Crew: experienced professionals. Captain Orlando Aguirre, 29, was a Puerto Rican pilot. He was passionate about aviation and a devoted father, who loved his family. He had 4,466 hours of total flight experience, and had flown 1,548 hours on the TR-72. His friends described him as a meticulous and safe pilot. That morning, he had placed a photo of his wife and young children in his wallet, unaware that he would never see them again. First Officer Jeffrey Gagliano was a young but experienced aviator at 27 years old. He had 5,047 total flight hours, more than even Captain Aguirre. Gagliano, who had dreamed of flying since childhood, was rapidly advancing in his aviation career. His colleagues knew him as a highly skilled and hardworking pilot. Senior flight attendant Patricia Connolly was 29 years old and had been working for American Eagle for 3 years. She was known for her warm relationship with passengers and her professional approach. That day, as always, she would do everything in her power to ensure passengers had a safe and comfortable journey. Flight attendant Rachel Worthing was only 25 years old, just starting her career. She was a young, energetic woman who loved her job. She had fulfilled her dream of becoming a flight attendant and continued to learn new things on every flight. Weather reports predicted clouds and rain with the potential for icing along the route. However, this was quite normal for that time of year. The crew had flown in such conditions dozens of times before. No one thought it would be a deadly trap. Passengers: 64 different stories. Each of the 64 passengers who boarded the plane that day had their own unique story. Business people and professionals. There were sales representatives, lawyers, and consultants with important meetings in Chicago. Jim Curnow, 42, was the sales manager of an automotive parts company. He was set to give a major client presentation in Chicago that week and was about to experience one of the most important moments of his career. Visitors and families. There were people traveling to visit their families for Halloween night. Charles Elder, 67, was traveling to Chicago to celebrate Halloween with his grandchildren. His luggage contained costumes and candy he had bought for them. Young professionals. Young people at the beginning of their careers were heading to Chicago in search of new opportunities. Sarah Nguyen, 26, was going to Chicago for an interview for a doctoral program at Northwestern University. This step toward realizing her dreams would be her final one. Elderly couples. There were elderly couples who had the opportunity to travel after retiring. Robert and Mary Patterson, both 72, were traveling to Chicago together for the first time in their 48-year marriage. Robert wanted to show his wife the beauty of the city. Students. University students were returning home for the holidays or visiting friends in Chicago. Traveling from Purdue University to visit his girlfriend in Chicago for Halloween break. Each of them boarded the plane that morning, thinking they would be reunited with their loved ones in Chicago that evening. None of them knew it would be their final journey. Takeoff and first signals. The plane took off from Indianapolis at 3:58 p.m. Captain Aguirre had completed his checks, and co-pilot Gagliano was following the takeoff procedures. The flight attendants had given the passengers their safety instructions, and everyone was seated. The first 40 minutes passed without incident. The plane was cruising at 16,000 feet, and everything was going according to plan. The passengers in the cabin were relaxed, some reading books, others looking out the window at the scenery. The flight attendants were serving drinks and chatting with the passengers. Captain Aguirre continued his routine communications with air traffic control. As they approached Chicago, the weather conditions began to deteriorate. Rain clouds began to appear on the radar screen in the cockpit. At 4:37 p.m., Chicago Approach Control placed the aircraft on a holding pattern due to icing conditions. American Eagle 4184. There is heavy traffic at O'Hare Airport. Remain on holding pattern at Rose Lawn. This was a normal situation for pilots, but this time it would be different. There was heavy traffic at O'Hare Airport, and landings were delayed due to weather conditions. Dozens of planes were waiting in the airspace. The plane began flying in a circular holding pattern at an altitude of 10,000 feet near Rose Lawn, Indiana. At that time, the outside temperature was -4°C, and the plane was in icing clouds. The pilots activated the anti-icing systems, but unfortunately, the TR-72 system was inadequate. The passengers were also aware of the situation. They could see the rain turning to ice through the windows. Some were beginning to worry, but the cabin crew were trying to calm them down. "It's a normal delay. There's nothing to worry about," they said. Deadly icing. The TR-72's wing design was sensitive to certain types of icing. In particular, the type of ice known as ridge ice, which forms in protrusions on the wing surface, could severely impair the aircraft's aerodynamic properties. The start of icing. Within the first 10 minutes, a thin layer of ice began to form on the wings. This seemed normal, and the pilots believed the situation was under control. Captain Auguer told his co-pilot, "The anti-icing systems are working. Everything is normal." Silent killer. However, there was an unknown problem with the TR-72. The anti-icing systems were unable to protect the entire wing. Ice forming on the wing edges continued to accumulate in areas the system could not reach. At 4:56 p.m., approximately 19 minutes into the holding pattern, the first alarm signals began to appear on the aircraft. The ice accumulating on the wings was reducing the aircraft's lift and disrupting the airflow. First warning signs. Pilots began to notice changes in the aircraft's behavior. The steering control was becoming heavier, and the aircraft required more power than usual. Co-pilot Gagliano told Captain Auguer, "Something is wrong. The aircraft is behaving differently." Tension in the cockpit. There were anxious glances between the two experienced pilots. The radar screen showed an icing area, but they had not anticipated it would be this severe. Captain Auguer asked air traffic control, "The icing conditions are more severe than expected. Can we descend to a lower altitude?" Air traffic control's response. American Eagle 4184. "There are other aircraft at lower levels right now. Hold on a bit longer. You'll receive clearance to land shortly." However, they had not yet fully grasped how critical the situation was. Time was running out quickly. Final minutes, chaos and panic. At 4:58 p.m. while circling, the aircraft suddenly began to make a sharp turn to the left. Due to icing, the airflow over the wings had been disrupted, and the aircraft had lost its aerodynamic properties. Critical moments. Captain Auguer tried to turn the steering controls to the right, but the plane did not respond. "What's happening? The controls aren't responding," he shouted. Co-pilot Gagliano was also panicking. "I can't stabilize it. The plane is falling." Autopilot failure. At that moment, the autopilot system also failed. The aircraft's computer systems detected the abnormal situation and handed control back to the pilots, but it was already too late. The aircraft was now at the mercy of the laws of physics. Terror in the cabin. Passengers felt the aircraft suddenly begin to shake and tilt. At first, they thought it was turbulence, but as the situation rapidly worsened, they panicked. Some passengers began screaming. The cabin crew's final duty, lead flight attendants Patricia Connolly and Rachel Worley tried to calm the passengers while also beginning to implement emergency procedures. "Everyone fasten your seatbelts. Assume the crash position," they shouted. The pilot's final effort, Captain Auguer, trying to regain control of the aircraft, was confronted with a shocking reality. The aircraft was no longer responding to his commands. "We've lost control. Mayday, mayday." He radioed for help. Spiral descent. The plane began spiraling downward uncontrollably within seconds. G-forces were pinning passengers to their seats. Some began to lose consciousness. Final communication, air traffic control. American Eagle 4184. "What is your situation?" Captain Auguer's final words. "We've completely lost control. We're going down from 16,000 feet to 1,000 feet. The plane plummeted from 16,000 feet to 10,000 feet, then to 5,000 feet in a matter of seconds." Passengers screamed in terror. Objects were flying around the cabin. Final seconds. Farmers and villagers on the ground noticed that the sound of the plane coming from the sky was unusual. The plane was flying so low that they could hear the sound of its engines. Then there was a terrifying silence. Impact. The end of 68 lives. At 4:58 p.m., just 21 minutes after entering the holding pattern, American Eagle so severe that the plane was completely destroyed, and a large crater was formed. Force of the impact. The plane hit the ground at 300 miles per hour, approximately 480 kilometers h. This speed was 10 times the force of a car crash. The sound of the impact was heard from miles away. First witnesses, George Weiss, who lived in a nearby farmhouse, heard a terrible explosion. It was like a lightning strike, but much more intense, he said. When he looked out the window, he saw a large ball of flames burning in the field. Emergency response. The first fire department arrived at the scene 15 minutes later. They were shocked by what they saw. The largest piece of the plane was smaller than a car. The debris was scattered over several kilometers, determining the number of victims. All 64 passengers and 4 crew members on board the plane were killed instantly. The impact was so severe that it took hours to determine the number of victims. DNA tests were required. Wreckage site. When the first responders arrived at the scene, they were met with a horrific sight. Large pieces of the plane were buried meters deep in the ground. This showed the extent of the impact's severity. Search and rescue efforts. Hundreds of volunteers, firefighters, police officers, and paramedics worked for hours, but there was no one to rescue. Only debris and personal belongings remained. Personal belongings. Personal belongings scattered across the field revealed the human dimension of the tragedy. Halloween costumes for children, work files, family photos, gifts for loved ones. Each one told a story of a life. The family's drama. That night, families waiting in Chicago had no news of their loved ones. There were people crying and anxious at the airport. When the morning news came, the lives of 68 families changed forever. Investigation. In pursuit of the truth. The NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, immediately launched a comprehensive investigation. Black box recordings, radar data, and weather reports were meticulously examined. The investigation lasted 2 years and revealed shocking results. Main cause. Icing, the buildup of ice on the aircraft's wings had caused critical aerodynamic disruption, a Tier 72 design issue. It was determined that this aircraft type was not safe under certain icing conditions. Pilot knowledge gap. The crew was not sufficiently informed about how dangerous such icing conditions could be. Air traffic control. The control tower had kept the aircraft waiting for too long under icing conditions. Results and changes. This accident marked a turning point for the aviation industry. New restrictions for a TR aircraft. A TR-72 and a TR-42 aircraft were banned from flying in certain icing conditions. New training for pilots. Training and flying in icing conditions became mandatory. Weather reporting system. A more detailed reporting system for icing conditions was developed. Changes in aircraft design. Anti-icing systems were developed for new generation aircraft. Those we will never forget. The American Eagle Flight 4184 crash was not just a technical failure. It was a tragedy that changed the lives of 68 families forever. The heroes we lost. Crew members. Captain Orlando Aguirre, 29 years old, father of 2 children. His wife Carmen and children always remember him with pride. At the memorial service held in Puerto Rico, thousands of people paid their respects. First Officer Jeffrey Gagliano, 27 years old, planning to marry his fiancée. The wedding invitations were waiting at home. Chief Flight Attendant Patricia Connolly, a heroic woman who worked until her last moment to ensure the safety of the passengers. Flight Attendant Rachel Worley, a young and hopeful professional living her aviation dreams. Passengers, each with a story. Those lost from the business world. Jim Curno's presentation in Chicago never took place. His company established a scholarship in his memory. Family visits. Charles Elder's grandchildren waited for their grandfather forever on Halloween night. The costumes he had bought were never opened. Young dreams. Sarah Wyand's doctoral interview appointment at Northwestern University was left empty. The university established a research fund in her memory. Love stories. Michael Stevens' girlfriend waited for him, in vain at the Chicago airport. In her boyfriend's bag was a ring she had bought for him. Retirement dreams. Robert and Mary Patterson's 48-year marriage ended that night. Their children never learned about their parents' plans for Chicago. Social impact. This accident was traumatic not only for the families, but for the entire community, Roselawn community. The residents of the small town could never forget what happened that night. Farmer George Weiss could never look at his field the same way again. Aviation community, pilots and cabin crew, were deeply shaken by the loss of their colleagues. Many pilots decided to undergo additional training on icing. American Eagle family, company employees experienced the pain of losing their friends. Company culture became safety first. Among the victims, young professionals on business trips, elderly people visiting their families, young people in the prime of their lives, experienced pilots and flight attendants. Each had their own story, loved ones, and dreams. This accident took them all from us in an instant. Lessons and memories. Today marks the 30th anniversary of the crash of American Eagle Flight 4184. During this time, aviation safety has made significant strides. Flight safety in icing conditions is now much better understood and addressed. However, the most important lesson learned from this accident is this: aviation safety will never be sufficient. Every accident, every loss of life, should be an opportunity to make systems even safer. We must never forget the 68 lives we lost on that cold Halloween night in Roswell. Their deaths guide us in preventing similar tragedies in the future. Dear viewers, if you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button. If you want to watch more of these mysterious and educational stories from aviation history, subscribe and turn on your notifications by clicking the bell icon. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which aspect of this accident impacted you the most? What topics related to aviation safety are you curious about? See you in our next video. Safe travels.